everyone, and welcome to this session of Crown World Mobility's Perspectives Live series. Our webinars typically coincide with the release of our Perspectives article series. This is an opportunity to hear an additional angle on the topic straight from our own subject matter experts here at Crown. My name is Jeannie, and I am part of the marketing team here in Crown, based in Malaysia, and I'll be your host for today's event. For us to quickly get started, I want to give you a couple of technology tips to keep things running smoothly. You will be on mute throughout the session. If you can also mute yourself, please do. Should you have any technology issues during the webinar, just know that we will be sending out the recording after the event. You will hear from me again during the question and answer period at the end. Just one more tip. Crown's Perspectives Live webinar has CRP credits available for ERC's professional certifications. If you would like to gain credits, please write down the session number on the screen. That is 16116. We will show this number again at the end of the webinar. Now, I am pleased to introduce to you Crown World Mobility's Global Practice Leader for Consulting Services, Lisa Johnson. Lisa is responsible for our Perspectives articles and Crown's industry research. She supports our clients with their mobility policies and program strategies and is a leader in addressing innovations and shifts impacting our industry. Now, let me hand it over to Lisa Johnson.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Jeannie, and welcome. We're so glad that you've joined us for today's session. In my mind, virtual events are always fun, but in the current environment of limiting face-to-face meetings, limiting or prohibiting large groups, travel bans, virtual events are also a really practical and healthy way for us to stay connected with our teams and with each other. So we're delighted that you are here today. For today, I've divided our session into 3 parts. First, I'm going to spend a few minutes giving you some context from a big picture view. And there's no way that we can do that without talking about COVID-19 also and our current situation. We just can't look at issues that are happening outside of our industry, outside of the business world that are influencing trends within the global mobility world without also talking about what's happening today, right now, with the pandemic that we are all being impacted by. So I've adjusted some of our session for today to that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. The majority of time, I'm still going to go through our 7 trends to watch in 2020. I will, where relevant, where applicable, be inserting some additional comments for all of us. For what we're dealing with today, in addition to some of the themes that I had already planned to discuss. And then we'll wrap up, and I hope that we'll have time for a few questions, and as Jeannie said, we'll use the chat function for those questions there at the end. So let's get started, and as I said, when we prepare for our trends each year, we start talking about it as a group before the end of the previous year, and are writing them up, and we're putting it together, and come January, we've already got a clear sense of the trends that we're going to be talking about. There's no way that we could have predicted what was we were going to face this year, is there? And all of us have been living through it in different waves, in different moments, in different ways and waves, right? We do know that eventually there will be a rebound, and it's going to happen in different times, in different places, but we know that it will be true. And we can even see China now that has lifted its head up, and where 8 weeks ago it was in a very different place, and as a country it's now reaching out and supporting others in crisis as well. And able to manage their own situation in a different way than they were eight weeks ago. For most of us, all of us within our organizations, within our communities, crisis management is in full force. I think we're tapping into focusing on things in our own organizations coming from a global mobility or a human resources perspective around strategic staffing and agile workforces and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well, of putting in flexible and agile ways of working, that there's no turning back from that anymore. I think when we first started talking about COVID-19, 8 weeks ago, we were talking about travel bans being put in place by organizations. Now we no longer are in charge of those because governments are putting those in place for us, right? But we do have many tools, existing skills in place that will prepare for the rebound. And when it happens, it's going to happen fast, and we all need to be ready for it. We're going to be looking for, I think all companies will be looking for efficiencies, we'll be looking for low-cost alternatives, and those are things that we already know about, that we've been talking about for a number of years now. So it's how are we going to put them in place to best meet our organization's needs when the rebound happens. But for now, we say, what a difference a month, a week, a day, an hour makes in terms of just new vocabulary, new ways of working, new ways of thinking. There's so many new concepts, whether it's washing your hands while you're singing, social distancing. For many of you, your child is now your coworker, right? And maybe some of your biggest preoccupations during the day are not stepping on a Lego as you're walking through to your desk. But we also know that, that we have so many just things that we could never have conceived of many weeks ago or many days ago or many hours ago that we're facing. And I was actually on a session earlier today with someone from EMEA, and they were saying, I miss Brexit. Who would have thought you would ever hear someone saying that today? So, we're in this moment, and I wanted to just speak to that context because I don't think we can go into just a general discussion around trends for 2020 and not have this in front of us as we discuss the broader context for this year's trends. When we talk about our trends at Crown, we like to have that macro view and move into more of a micro view and looking at specific things that are happening in our business and in our world. And as I mentioned, our trends list was written before the coronavirus outbreak. And clearly it changes our look at 2020. And as I said, I'm definitely going to be adding some comments as we go through the list. Here we are in the first months of 2020. We're getting towards the end of the first quarter. And, before any of COVID-19 even happened, if we can even think back that far, which wasn't so long ago, even in those moments, the lines between business and politics had become more blurred than ever before. And responsibilities that historically have been seen as political are now being taken on and even championed by the global business community. There's definitely a rising concern about the effects of climate change, and those are reframing business priorities in most industries, and they have been. It's been really interesting, actually, just in the past week. I've seen some pictures, and probably you have too, from outer space looking down at Earth and seeing a more clear environment and clear skies than have been seen in many years because of the stop of traffic and of production and air flights. So it's very interesting. Also, I saw a picture, I think only yesterday, of Venice in Italy, and showing fish that were swimming in the canals and seeing that come back to life so quickly, having stopped any of the large ships and the typical traffic that goes through it. So, there is the rising concern about the effects of climate change, and it's reframing business priorities in most industries, as I mentioned. And it's going to be interesting to see once we do start to rebound, and once we are through this current crisis and the current pandemic, what we may decide not to go back to in terms of seeing the positive impact that some some of the slowdown has had on the environment. The generational shifts that we've been talking about for almost a decade certainly continues, and the newest generation's influence of new values and expectations about the workplace and what working looks like are becoming a normal part of corporate values and assumptions. Those youngest millennials and emerging Gen Zs now, right? The youngest millennials are part of a millennial group that are in most organizations the majority of the population, and the emerging Gen Zers are coming in or are about to be recruited, right? And those assumptions, that the things that they expect around an agile workforce, around alternative work environments, around different kinds of opportunities, different kinds of feedback, different kinds of communication, those are really seeping in and becoming the norm for any generation in every organization. And the final backdrop that I want to point out is just the notion that corporate stakeholders have really expanded now. And they have expanded to include customers, of course, employees, and communities, as well as shareholders. And I think we're seeing that just in these weeks that we've had here in the first part of 2020. We're certainly seeing CEOs and organizations around the world step up, step up and really speak to what's happening in the world and understand that their organization is part of a bigger community, and their customers are important to them as well as their employees. And so we're seeing that manifest itself just in how companies are responding to the crisis that we are all living, as well as governments, or maybe even better in some cases. Excuse me. So with that context, starting with COVID-19 and what we discussed in the previous slides, and now thinking about what are some of the bigger shifts that were happening already before the beginning of the year, let's move into Crown's 7 trends to watch for 2020. And as I said, I definitely will be weaving in our current situation into these trends. I don't think we can speak in a vacuum, can we? That just wouldn't make any sense. So I am really excited to talk to you about our first trend on the list, and that's sustainable priorities. So here we are, and we're coming out of the hottest decade on record, and we just see more mainstream acceptance for urgent action on climate change. It was really building to a crescendo here going into 2020. Companies and employees are definitely stepping up and finding ways to reduce and improve their environmental impacts. Global mobility, like many industries, requires travel in a normal situation, doesn't it? It requires packing, shipping, and more. And there's no way not to have an impact on the environment. So it's definitely time that we start talking about ways to reduce or counterbalance the negative impact of our industry, along with the ways that our own organizations are talking about that outside of the mobility industry. We're seeing some of our clients whose organizations and CEOs are already committed to corporate sustainability begin to look for ways to add this priority to their mobility strategies. And so our full article for the Perspectives article on the trends goes into a great deal of detail on this. But I just want to give you a few examples. So when we talk about global mobility sustainability, it's about creating meaningful reductions and making smarter choices at any level, at the individual level, at the team level, at a company level, or an industry level. And it can also be about encouraging our supply chains and business partners to strive for more sustainable goals. So I think it's very interesting. Of course, we're in the middle of a crisis. We've come to a real slowdown in terms of moving people and putting things on hold, right? And so it is a really good time as a team and within your organization to do some creative thinking about considerations and actions you can take to get started. I think one of the areas I like most on an individual level for those employees who are in the future going to go on international assignments or going to be transferred is to provide green guidelines for relocating employees prior to their move. Those guidelines can really highlight sustainable ways to reduce waste during the move, and helping your employees make personal choices with positive consequences. So that might be identifying ways to donate personal goods that will not be packed and don't make sense to store, including things like canned food or excess furniture or appliances or cars, right? There's an organization that many of you may have heard of that's called Move for Hunger. It's a U.S. headquartered company. It's opened in a couple of other countries as well. But the example of the organization is what I want to share, because that's something that's replicable, certainly. And that takes your employees' donated canned goods and donates it to a local community food pantry in the community where that employee has been living. So on moving day, a box is put with stickers, in Move for Hunger's case, with their own stickers and branding on it that shows, let's put the canned goods in this box that can then be donated to a local food pantry. So ideas like that are what we want to be thinking about and inspiring each other with. From a global mobility team level, I love the idea of giving your team the challenge this year to come up with ideas for how they and your employees and company can move this topic ahead. Offsetting the environmental impact of your program is a corporate level example, right? So we've seen an individual level, a team level of having this. I've had clients that have put this on their global mobility annual team meeting, that it's on the agenda with their different partners, external partners as well, and they've brainstormed different ways that they would address sustainability and choices in their programs. So offsetting for a company might be something like planting a tree for each authorization you have each year, or making a donation to a green organization. So it's really an emerging topic, and we're really excited to start talking about it at Crown, and hope to inspire you all with moving forward with us on it. So you definitely, in the article, will see more examples of this. And it's the sustainability priorities for mobility. If I go to most websites of many of your organizations, I know that sustainable priorities are key in not just your organizations, but in the different industries that you represent. And so to add that to your own strategy, your own priorities this year, I think is a great new addition. All right. Our second trend on this year's list is duty of care, and that's a recurring topic. And boy, we could spend the entire session on this topic of duty of care, because it is really broad. This year, we really want to give focus to mental health during an assignment, and I think actually when you're in the middle of a crisis, thinking about mental health is also really, has even a different emphasis. And brings sort of a new definition to that. Mental health in the workplace is definitely a growing area of focus for many of our organizations, isn't it? Just like sustainable priorities are key, so is talking about mental health and the well-being of employees. So let's just start by getting a refresh around the larger topic of duty of care. As I said, it's not the first time it's been on our list. It's actually a recurring theme, and we like to look at the different ways that it is evolving. And so we're going to think about it in a few different ways for a few minutes here. A big part of mobility, mobility-related duty of care, lies in preparing business travelers, which before they go, relocating employees and their families for the unexpected. And boy, we are facing the unexpected right now, aren't we? So you've probably been dealing with duty of care just as a result of our current situation with the pandemic. So on a normal day, in a normal year, where we're outside of something like what we're living right now, you still have a duty of care preparedness to support families and employees from illness, accidents, personal and family security, political upheaval and terrorism, immigration changes that could impact an assignment, which we're seeing right now, right? And other duty of care involves less common concepts, but they're also important, like understanding the financial implications of a move for an employee before they decide to take that move. And by the way, also helping your own business partners understand the duty of care responsibilities of your organization on not doing harm to employees and families. Because sometimes I've seen a business partner who is very interested in cutting costs and maybe eliminating certain types of support from a policy in order to save money. And we do in global mobility, all of us have an obligation to educate our business partners to help them understand the potential impact for the elimination of key support for a company requested move, and even for an employee requested move, to help employees make educated decisions. For the employee, they may be looking at, well, what are the tax consequences? Or do I have preparation for cultural differences, for new language? Those also fall under duty of care support. But often it is in a time of emergency or crisis or pandemic, which hasn't happened in any of our lifetimes and hopefully won't happen in anyone's lifetime in the future. But these are the moments that remind us how important it is to have a duty of care plan in place, right? It really is. So let's take a minute and look at that. Here we are, and we're in the middle of this crisis, and we can't speak about duty of care and not talk about the COVID-19 and emergency preparedness. And I want to talk about it in a couple of different ways. So first, just in the most basic way in terms of emergency strategies for mobility programs, which should already exist in your policies. So a global mobility policy should always address things like emergency evacuation and support. Just in general, right? But we know from our 2019 long-term assignment policy survey at Crown that less than half, 49% of policies address emergency evacuation in the policy. And of those policies, those 49%, these are policy basics, right, to address emergency evacuation. Of those policies, 56% of companies provide transportation to the nearest safe haven, and 30% state that living expenses will be covered. So there's room to shore up policies on basic emergency evacuation discussions. Of course, from a strategic side of your program, it involves the relationships with your network. So companies like International SOS, which are great partners to make sure that your employees have access to information and support. It's so common today, and I bet many of you have tapped into this just in the past few weeks. Whether we're talking about Brexit or coronavirus or past events like SARS or the Arab Spring uprising or an Icelandic volcano in the more distant past, but not that far away. Those are all examples of moments when we rely on contingency plans to get a real sense of how prepared we are with information. So on the day that a travel ban arises, when your CEO is saying, tell me how many employees we have from these locations and how many employees we have with those passports in which location, making sure that we have all employees accounted for. Sometimes even when we hire third country nationals, sometimes our employees may have different passports than their partners or their children as well. So it's times like this where we recognize where the gaps are in some of our information and where we have needed to shore it up just over the past few weeks, right? How prepared we are with information. So like many companies, Crown is providing updates on a pretty regular basis. Our immigration updates are really some of the best. So if you're not signed up to get those, please make a note because they are super. And you know, Crown, like any other organization that has an immigration practice and immigration team, they're doing, you know, working 24/7 because immigration changes can happen on an hourly basis. It's just really turns your head. And so it's great to have reliable resources. I think if I could say, and I'm not saying that there is anything good in a crisis, but there are some outcomes that I think will change things forever, and some of them are positive. If there is one that I could just highlight kind of right here, and we'll highlight some more as we go along, it has been putting agile and flexible work options into action. Different industries and different parts of the world have resisted following or allowing for flexible work options, and this event has forced it. And remember that flexible work options are not just working from home. It's being agile, it's having flexible start times, flexible ways of working. So it's not just about working from home. And not every role would allow for that anyway, right? But flexible work options in whatever definitions that come out of this, we've now tested them, and we know that they are really good for gender equality strategies in any organization. They're good for families. They're good for recruiting new talent. And so despite being in this very scary moment when we're looking for cracks or some positives that will come out of the testing of our business continuity strategies and new ways of working, I definitely think that that is one of them. It's hard to believe that just a little over a week ago, on the 8th of March, we started celebrating International Women's Day. So much has, sort of we've taken on so many other priorities, clearly, in the moment. But it was something that we were thinking about in terms of what would help with Each for Equal and International Women's Day, and thinking about gender equality in the workplace, and that's certainly one of them. All right, so let's close out this trend, going back to a focus that I'm genuinely really, really interested in and passionate about, and I think many of you are too, because it's so important and it's not easy to talk about. So it's about mental health for international assignees and mental health for employees. So what do we know when we're talking about international assignees? We know that moving causes stress. Culture shock is just another word for stress. And even when an employee is highly motivated, and employees and their families are being disrupted from their communities, their friends, and their family. For the employee, often before they are going on an international assignment, they are top performers at home. And suddenly they're in a new environment with a new manager, new ways for giving and getting feedback, for communicating, for meeting participation, which varies across cultures, which I know that many of you are familiar with, right? They are even, thinking about humor, which varies across cultures, interaction with their managers and subordinate relationships, which vary across cultures. So they're in a very visible and potentially stressful situation. And if they're accompanied, they're worried about their family's adaptation. And if they're alone, then they are not only having to manage work and daily living, but also settling in. It's also important to remember that accompanying partners often have the more challenging role in the move. So they're the second blue box on the right on your screen. They have the more challenging role in a move, and they can be more isolated because they've often left a job back home. And when the employee goes to work and the kids go to school and the partner is left to initiate interactions and all their activities, they're doing that on their own. So there's been a lot of research on this, and accompanying partners definitely often have more isolation than the employee. As a result, it's really critical, and I want to end this particular trend thinking about what's there on the right of your screen, which is educating HR, educating sending and receiving managers, your global mobility team, and employees about the resources available to support mental health on assignment. So I think that this year we need to remove the stigma of discussing this in 2020. We need to become more confident in our ability to broach the subject and to support our employees in this space. And so there are, in the full perspectives article on the trends, there are some additional examples of this for you to look at and consider with your own organizations. And again, duty of care, employee mental health, that's an area that is already a priority in many organizations. And I just want us to think about how can we take a next step in talking about it in our global mobility programs. All right. Our third trend is focused on global mobility communities. And today, of course, more than 40% of the world is on social media. And on this group, in our organizations, it's probably 99%, right? It's about connecting and sharing information. So linked to that reality is the growing trend around participating on online communities made up of people with common interests. This is something we already know. No surprises, right? Sharing information, exchanging ideas. You can see just in the past 8 weeks how important this is, just in the crisis that we're in right now around exchanging information. We actually have too much information, and there's something called an infodemic, which is too much information available, and it's hard to know what's true and what's not true. But lots of public and private global communities that are out there. But this year we're talking about global mobility communities in 2 ways. So let's just look at it in these 2 ways. First, we're looking at it as a platform that's going to really benefit diverse employee populations on international assignments or relocating for their jobs in sharing similar situations and getting to know a neighborhood, a community. It's especially valuable for less represented mobile populations, like female employees or male accompanying partners or members of the LGBT community. So on that side of communities and finding new platforms it's like an extension of our settling in services, right? It's an extension of getting settled in and adjusting to the new location. It's giving information prior to getting there and once you're there. And we can't think of how helpful this type of community has been just in the current crisis that we're all in. But where we see another new growth opportunity for communities, and we're also seeing it tapped into today in this current situation, is within global mobility teams. So with internal and external team members, this is a place to quickly share information, questions, best practices, challenges, without waiting for the next meeting. It's in the moment. And for any of you who are in companies that use Workplace from Facebook or Microsoft Teams, you're leveraging those platforms for these purposes. And we just expect this to be completely the norm for globally dispersed teams as technology continues to improve in this space. It's just changing the dynamic of geographically dispersed teams. And as I said, any of you who have those set up already, right now with COVID-19 and working from home and working in different across time zones and trying to share information and check in with people, it's certainly an asset for business continuity. And it's been a game changer. So for those of you who already use it, you may say, yeah, we have that. And we definitely, at Crown, we use Microsoft Teams. We have some set up for our teams with our clients, and we have some internally. But in the moment, you can ask a question, what are you seeing around this? What's happening with your employees in this location? What are some of the questions you have? And those it's almost like a benchmarking live, isn't it? It's like just checking in and getting information from all around the world using that. What a big change that is for team dynamics and for high-performing teams. And believe it or not, not every company has that yet. So we're highlighting it as a trend. If you've already got it, I think technology is just going to continue to improve. And if it's not something you have, it is something that is available and waiting to enhance the team experience. So global mobility communities are really changing in different ways. All right, our fourth trend is all about repatriation. So in the past, repatriation was that conversation you might have when you're discussing the phase that comes at the end of assignments. And that, of course, still exists, definitely. But we've also seen an increase in alternatives to repatriation, which we've definitely talked about before. And that could be talking about consecutive assignments, employees on global career paths where they're not looking for a home country to go back to. They look for the next opportunity. And localization into assignment locations. That's another end of assignment transition. Maybe finding a new role in a location that's not your home country for the employee. So maybe finishing an assignment and then finding a permanent role because maybe the home location has evolved and doesn't have the same opportunities, and there's not a role waiting for an employee. And so if they want to continue to work in the organization, they look for a new role in another location. Really, one of the biggest challenges in the life cycle of an international assignment is still post-assignment placement. And repatriation's evolving definition is necessary. I was just on a session today with Johnson & Johnson, which is world-renowned for their talent mobility, one of the most advanced talent mobility strategies out there for organizations that really want to link mobility to the international assignments and career planning. But and they're mature in that. Their strategy has been around for more than 7 years. But what the person leading the discussion today said is the one place we don't have anything really in our program and is around repatriation, and it's linked to career planning. That's maybe an area that we still have definitely room to improve. So you're not alone if you're sitting there nodding your head, but because repatriation and placement post-assignment is a real challenge for most organizations. But lately we're looking at something that we call happy attrition. Now, I know it sounds a little strange, and you're saying, what, for many of you, you're saying, what is happy attrition? But there are companies that may not mind and even expect some employees to move on at the end of an assignment. Turnover is not always a bad thing. Clearly, that's not the case for all attrition. If you have just sent someone on a developmental assignment and they are part of your high potential employees, and you're giving them that experience because you're grooming them for a future leadership role, the last thing that you want is a happy attrition. It would be a very unhappy attrition because of that investment that you've just made. But thinking about the world of the gig economy and thinking about organizations that are filling different roles for different reasons, turnover is not always a bad thing. And some agile companies that are focused on innovation don't just manage change, but they embrace it. And they're better prepared for some of the attrition that occurs. And so we want that to be under the umbrella of different ways of looking at post-assignment options, because post-assignment options, as I said, are not easy, and we need to have a broad way of looking at it and a smart way to look at it. Okay? So I'm throwing that out there. And we want that to be added to your conversation list as you think about your strategies. All right. Here we are in 2020, and we can't have a trends list without focusing on the big X. It's our second year in a row with this topic, and we're definitely watching how it evolves in our industry. And the employee experience, X, is certainly driving improvements across the board. For customers, for employees, for everyone, right? It definitely is the case. In global mobility, we now see AX, the assignee experience, GMX, the global mobility experience, and new demands and customer behavior create dissatisfaction if your global mobility team is still using, out-of-date ways of thinking about the mobility program. So let's just look at the first one, ignoring onboarding. If you have not made a change to your onboarding of new assignees at the time of authorization in the past couple of years, then you probably are not focused on the employee experience or the assignee experience or global mobility experience enough. If you have a pause or a slowdown now where you can think about your strategy and identify a few places where you're going to make some changes this year, I think any of the trends that we're talking about today could be something that you pick up and say, let's think about this now in the next few weeks, and let's just think about ways to focus on this. But onboarding is certainly an important place for an employee that's coming into the global mobility experience. If you're still using Excel spreadsheets, and I can tell you that even some of the most technologically forward, innovative companies in the world whose main industry is providing technology and services externally to their clients, internally are still using Excel spreadsheets in many cases. So you're not alone. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. But poor communication, inconsistencies, disconnections. Some of that may have arisen just now in the past month or two where you realize we're not as consistent around our communication as we could be. When we have to ask for the same information over and over again. If you have policies that are 35 pages long and they're not user-friendly, maybe they're not click-through where you can just, there's not a simple way of presenting policy information, or they're out of touch. They're much more prescriptive and less simple and informal and user-friendly, then that may be a challenge. No end of assignment plan, or no choices or flexibility. There's so many things that cause dissatisfaction for your employees, and even your global mobility team, and even your business partners at the end of the day. So if any of these are something that resonate with you of an area to improve, then that's something to look at. But one of the best improvements that we see for global mobility experience is with the technology that's now available to support easy decision making, and technology that supports flexible policy trends and the increased use of lump sum and employee choice. And I think, as I talked about at the beginning of this session, when the rebound happens, we need to be ready and agile for moving quickly and finding efficiencies and low-cost ways to be moving our employees in different ways. And part of that is going to be able to tap into technology that exists now across our industry that helps to use lower cost and flexible core flex policies or lump sum and employee choice policies. Until recently, the biggest concerns for flexible and DIY do-it-yourself moves have been related to the challenges that they bring around the negative employee experience. They have gone hand in hand. We've done a lot of research on this at Crown, and I'm sure some of you have done some research on this as well. One of the biggest concerns for lump sum and employee choice or cash options is around a negative employee experience and also productivity dips. When you're asking the employee to do the research themselves, here's the cash, go figure it out, and they're doing a lot of that while they're sitting at their desks and also trying to do their day jobs, whether it's finishing up a job before they move or starting a new job, and inconsistent experiences. So there are a growing number of tools available to improve the experience. That's great news, and we're really excited about it. Crown has its own Flex tool. There are lots of options out there. Technology makes the choices user-friendly, and benefits with options are easier than ever to assess and manage as a result of that. So here we are at a time when booking a cab, watching a movie, making a payment can be done remotely, and the available of more standard technology to manage flexible policy options is a big step. We're really excited about it. We think that this is, a real tipping point to make it comfortable to use lower cost move alternatives. And I can tell you that as we move to the others, I know it's hard to think about right now while we're in the middle of a pandemic, but when we do come out on the other side, we're going to want to be moving very quickly and looking at applying some of the low-cost approaches to mobility that have been evolving over the past 5 to 6, 7 years, but now we're ready for that as an industry. And so I think that we really can be prepared to embrace that in new ways and at a faster rate than our industry has in the past. All right, our second to last trend, and I do want to leave a few minutes for some questions. So let's just quickly go through our last two trends, although for me it's hard to go quickly because I feel really passionate about each one, and I get to the next one and I say, well, this is my favorite. And sustainability, yes, that was our first one, and that's one of my favorites, but this is genuinely one of my favorites. So here we are. It's our trend number 6 out of 7, and we're going to be talking about diversity and leadership. So I know many of you participated in and are aware of our recent study where we did research with 100 global companies around diversity and inclusion links to mobility. And there were a lot of really good findings in that study, and they can be found in the full report. It's available to you. It's on our website. We can send it to you. But one of them really jumped out to us, and we want to expand on it here. So we asked companies whether international experience is valued or required in their organizations. Does it give your employees a leg up or an advantage in their career paths? And so let's just look at a couple of data points as we move towards the answer to that question. First of all, we started by asking, does your organization have a diversity inclusion strategy? And our research confirms that having a D&I strategy is now normal. 68% of companies already have these strategies. D&I is certainly on most companies' radars, and it's an increasing priority, right? So I can go to the websites of almost any company on this call today, on this webinar, and I will see, your diversity inclusion priorities right there on your company's website. And so we said 68% have it, another 16% are adding it. It's interesting because we can break down the data of companies that have had their diversity inclusion strategy for more than 5 years or less than 5 years, and it's pretty evenly split. And I call the ones that are 5 years or more mature strategies. So it's in their DNA. It's probably a company where the CEO and leadership are talking about it, that there are strategies in place, and so they're thinking about it maybe more in a more mature way, right? But there are many emerging programs with 1 to 3 years of having a strategy in place as well. So, it runs across the spectrum. You don't need to feel bad no matter where you are at an early stage or just getting started. And if you're in a more mature place, then hopefully you're driving the innovation for us in this space. But now let's just look at what I think is sort of the crux around this for global mobility. We asked, is international experience valued or required in relation to career advancement? And the answer was profoundly yes. So both for the general population, which is there on the left of your screen, and for the senior leadership development and career advancement on the right of your screen. Looking at the blue of that pie chart on either of those charts and the dark gray, 79% of companies said it gives an employee an advantage or it's required to have international experience. And that's a big eye-opener for global mobility and talent mobility teams. If your company values or requires international experience, but the mobile population doesn't reflect the diversity and inclusion priorities and goals in the company, future leaders in your organization are also not going to reflect the diversity and inclusion priorities either. So, we're at a time where going into an organization in any recruiting cycle of a year, you could say that probably 50% of employees coming into your organization are women and 50% are men. It's usually even right there at the early career stages. But as people move up in the organization, that there becomes the gender gap that we're all familiar with. And as we know, any of us who have been in mobility for more than 5, 10, 15 years, the gender gap in international assignee populations has barely moved for most organizations. And if your organization is an organization where it has moved, then you're a leader and you need to talk about how you did that and really promote that and share with others so that we can, see examples out there. But it is definitely still an issue, less than 20%, in some cases 16%. In engineering, oil, and gas, it's 1% of employees are women. So if we're trying to move women up in organizations, it gives them an advantage, a leg up to have had the international experience. And so how would you start raising an awareness in your organization around giving visibility to diversity inclusion and linking it to mobility? In our research, we saw that only 29% of companies have formal links, but 29% of companies have formal links. I think that's great. That's almost 30%. So they're really leading the way. There's definitely room in our industry to improve, but the latest D&I research gives some examples of this. And this slide just shows a few ways that companies are promoting and focused on diversity and inclusion in global mobility and raising that awareness, whether it's profiles and photos, similar to recruiting strategies, right? What you would put on your website or your intranet site. I have one client, and on their intranet site, they have a video of a female engineer who moved from one city to another in their organization. And there's an interview with the manager who talks about the importance of this woman's career path as a female engineer, as somebody who is key talent, who they were able to tap into, but also the relocation of that employee and how important that was. That's great visibility, even if it's a 3-minute video that's up on your intranet to show other women and other selection managers that there's diversity in and possibilities in your program. That last example on the right, adding the D&I logo to the mobility team's signature to show an openness that you're a supporter or an ally of your diversity inclusion values and strategy, it's a simple, positive step. And Crown added it probably 6 or 7 years, not years ago, sorry, 6 or 7 months ago. But we're really excited about it. And we were piggybacking on some of our clients and our contacts that also have the logo for their diversity and inclusion on their signatures. So if you want to see what that looks like, send me an email. I promise I'll respond, and you'll see it right there on my signature. And it's a great approach. So my last thoughts on this second to last trend is that no matter what industry you're in, and the business case for diversity inclusion has been made already. I have a stack of studies, whether it's from Air Inc., Mercer, Deloitte, KPMG, the World Economic Forum, and more, that provide data showing the financial and strategic benefits for companies with more diversity in their DNA. So our big questions coming from the research is not should companies care about diversity inclusion? They do. The question is, are global careers accessible to your organization's diverse workforce? And that's where mobility comes in. All right. We come to the last big trend to watch in 2020, and it's domestic mobility and the maturing of domestic mobility in new parts of the world. And I genuinely am excited to end with this emerging topic because it's a spread of organized and coordinated domestic mobility for companies. Now, most of you know that domestic relocation as part of a corporate mobility program has evolved primarily in the U.S., Canada, the UK, and Australia. And part of that history is cultural. Cultures that are open to leaving home in search of a new adventure historically, that have had that for a couple of generations now. And part of it is political in terms of having an historic openness to migration and laws and regulations that have allowed it. So I know it's hard to think about and talk about domestic relocation and domestic mobility in a time when we're living in lockdowns and not moving outside of our homes in many cases or our communities, much less moving to other places. But it is something that has been evolving recently, and it will pick up again in the future. And I think this is maybe a good time to just reflect on it as we are sitting and reflecting on what we do well, what's changing, and what we can look forward to in the near future and in the future, right? So it isn't to say that other countries have not had domestic corporate relocation, but it's on a much smaller scale, and the policies and approaches are less formal and not tracked, much more ad hoc and negotiated without guidelines. So at Crown, we've been tracking companies that are incorporating domestic mobility under the global mobility function, and it has slowly increased in recent years. So some of the drivers have had to do with what you see on your screen. Consistency in the employee experience is the one I just want to grab on right there over on the left-hand top blue box. If you have an HR manager who only relocates 1 or 2 people a year, it's not always going to be something they do well. It's like those people, and I won't name any names, and I'm certainly not talking about myself, but those people who only do their expense reports not every month. And so they have to relearn how to do it, right? So here we are, and we may have someone who is in charge of someone's move, and they haven't done this before, or they don't do it very often. So it's not necessarily something that they have expertise on. Other benefits include cost tracking, use of technology, but I really do love the employee experience, and the war for talent will only get bigger in the future after we move beyond the COVID virus. When you're looking to attract and hire great people, whether it's in China, Singapore, Japan, Brazil, Germany, it's really important to be able to support that well. And one of the key ways that we see domestic mobility making a difference right now is around partner support for job outplacement. So dual career families where both partners work is a real barrier to domestic relocation, except in a few countries like China and in some cases Japan, where split families are more accepted. People are willing to do it, or it's almost impossible to have a partner leave their extended family and career to move with the employee. But it is happening. We're seeing it a lot more in Europe, and we're seeing it a lot more in some parts of Asia. So our domestic partner support is invaluable. But domestic mobility is maturing under the global mobility umbrella, and we're going to continue to watch this space. All right, here we are at the end. We have a couple of more minutes, but we've gone through our 7 trends to watch, and I really appreciate you joining. I know I love that we can offer some virtual opportunities to get all of us together in our industry and to share different ideas. And I hope that this is going to give you some considerations around the topics that you want to focus on, maybe while things are slowed down a bit, and maybe to get inspired from, and also as we're going to be called on to innovate and to address new demands. As I said, when the rebound happens, and it will, we will be asked to move very quickly. We will need to be ready for efficiencies, for low-cost ways of low-cost approaches and solutions, and to have the information that's going to be needed right there on hand. And so anytime there's a shift or a crisis or an event that we have to respond to, as we are today, we learn that agility and openness to change are critical characteristics. So I can't wait to hear which of our trends you're also thinking about. And I'm looking forward to some great discussions as we continue to communicate in different ways in this coming year. So thanks for spending time with us today. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Jeannie, and see if we have, I don't know if we have a time for maybe one question. And you can use your chat box, or Jeannie.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, everyone, now if you have any questions, please type them directly into the chat space on the right of your screen. Lisa, here's a question that has come in. Can you share more on what Crown is seeing related to the impact of the coronavirus?
Well, of course. And, I started off by saying, it's definitely the elephant in the room, or the situation that we're all really thinking about. So as I said, we started to think about our trends prior to COVID-19, but we have to talk about it. And like many of you at Crown, we're definitely doing everything we can to prioritize health, safety, peace of mind for our own staff. So not only are we providing we're a trusted advisor and providing our expertise in mobility to many organizations, but we're also a global company with employees in more than 50 countries and more than 3,000 employees. And so we're also focused on our own staff as well. And at any time of uncertainty, I would say the thing that I've most talked about with companies and with our own teams is communication. And communication is king. You have to communicate more often than not. That includes managing expectations, managing your business partners. If you think that you have communicated enough, you probably haven't. If you have employees who are stuck in different locations, if you have employees who are, they were just about to leave on an assignment and now they are in a holding mode. It is really, really important to over-communically. I guess the other thing that I'm thinking about, we talked about technology earlier, and like many of you, we've really invested a lot in technology that allows us to chat, to use video conferencing, other collaborative tools to maintain a really personalized service. And I think that technology is an advantage in this situation for sure. And I talked about that with the global mobility communities and having virtual solutions. So we are doing updates. I'm happy to share that with you and share some of our latest updates with you. But it's clearly on all of our minds right now. I'm not sure, Jeannie, I think we're at the top of the hour. Maybe we can collect some of the questions that came in and put something together and share that with people afterwards?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So,
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah. So we are at the end of this Perspectives Live session. I hope that you have enjoyed it. You can see on your screen our QR code with a short survey. We'd love to get your feedback.
Hang on, I'll put it up.
Yes, can you just?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Lisa?
No. If you have time to give us some feedback for this, that would be great. And if you can't use the QR code or don't have time, we'll send you out the feedback in an electronic version as well. But we really appreciate you spending time with us today. It feels good to get everyone together and to talk about sort of more, larger strategies and just connect with each other during this time. So we're going to really work to have some more virtual opportunities to bring all of you together and all of us together. And thank you so much for spending your time with us this hour. And please stay safe and stay well. This was a message that was sent out from SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management. And just take care of yourselves and those around you. And I thought that this was a really important and calming message right here in the middle of a crisis. So we wanted to share this with you here at the end. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much again for attending our series, and a big thanks to Lisa Johnson. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day, guys.
Bye, everybody.